$3 million, I said, sliding the settlement offer across the polished conference table. That's our final number. The blood drained from Richard Keller's face as he stared at the document, his attorney whispering frantically in his ear. Across from me, 5 members of Horizon Technologies' board of directors sat in stunned silence, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and barely concealed panic. "This is extortion," Richard finally sputtered, his manicured hand trembling slightly as he pushed the paper away. "Based on what? A misunderstanding at a company party? A friendly gesture taken out of context?" I smiled thinly and placed my phone on the table, screen up. "Should we review the friendly gesture again? I found that the 4K resolution really captures the intentional way your hand moved up my thigh. The audio is remarkably clear, too, especially the part where I say 'please stop' 3 times. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The female board member, the only woman in a sea of tailored suits, closed her eyes briefly. "Ms. Alvarez," the company's attorney interjected, "perhaps we could discuss this privately, without the theatrics?" "Theatrics?" I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Is that what we're calling sexual harassment now? Fascinating evolution of corporate language." I leaned forward, making eye contact with each board member in turn. "Let me be crystal clear. What happened to me wasn't a one-time incident or a misunderstanding. It was the culmination of months of escalating behavior that your HR department systematically ignored. And unlike the 7 other women who've been paid to disappear quietly, I kept receipts." The CEO's face twitched at the mention of 7 women. He didn't know the number was that high. "Good. What exactly do you want?" he asked, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable, concerned. "Beyond the financial settlement?" I tapped the document. "I want Richard terminated, immediately and publicly. I want an independent investigation into your HR practices. And I want a public statement acknowledging the failure of leadership that allowed this culture to flourish." "Absolutely not," Richard's attorney responded immediately. "My client's reputation would be irreparably damaged. We're prepared to offer compensation, but these additional demands are excessive and punitive." I picked up my phone again, my thumb hovering over the screen. "The video gets posted in 20 minutes unless we have a deal. After that, the settlement offer triples, and I speak exclusively with the reporter who's been collecting testimonies from former employees for the past 2 weeks." I glanced at my watch. 19 minutes now. Tick-tock, gentlemen and lady," I added, nodding to the female board member who hadn't taken her eyes off me. "You're bluffing," Richard said, but his complexion had taken on a grayish tinge. I shrugged. "Maybe. But do you really want to risk the alternative? The footage trending. On social media, the hashtags, the think pieces about toxic tech bros, the stock price in free fall?" I smiled again. "And that's before the other women start coming forward. You'd be amazed how courage is contagious." The CEO whispered something to the company attorney, who nodded reluctantly. "We need to confer," the attorney announced. "Can you give us the room for 10 minutes?" "Of course," I said, standing smoothly. "Just remember, the clock is running." As I stepped into the hallway, my bravado momentarily faltered. My hands were shaking, my heart racing beneath my carefully selected power suit. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined myself here, facing down a room full of executives with millions of dollars on the line. 6 months ago, I was just trying to survive my first job out of college without being groped by my boss. Funny, how quickly things can change when you've got the truth on video. My name is Elena Alvarez, and I was hired as a marketing associate at Horizon Technologies in January. Fresh out of NYU with a marketing degree and student loans that kept me up at night, I was thrilled to land a position at one of the fastest-growing tech firms in Boston. During my interview, I'd been impressed by the company's sleek headquarters, the casual, cool atmosphere, and the promise of advancement opportunities. "We promote based on merit here," Richard Keller, the marketing director, had assured me with what I later came to recognize as his practiced smile. Talent rises quickly at Horizon. What he'd failed to mention was the unspoken qualification for that talent to rise, tolerating his wandering hands and inappropriate comments. The first incident happened 3 weeks into the job. I was presenting campaign ideas during a team meeting when Richard interrupted me. "That skirt was an interesting choice for a business presentation," he said, eyes lingering on my legs. Though I'm not complaining. The room had gone quiet. A few people looked down at their notepads. Others exchanged glances. I felt my face burn as I struggled to continue my presentation, suddenly hyper-aware of every movement, every word. Afterward, my colleague Jen caught up with me in the hallway. "Don't let it get to you," she advised quietly. "He does that to all the new girls. It's gross but harmless." "Harmless?" I echoed, still shaken. "That was textbook inappropriate workplace behavior." Jen shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "Look, you can report it if you want, but between us, the last girl who complained got transferred to data entry. Just be careful." I should have recognized the red flag for what it was. Instead, I told myself that every workplace had its quirks, that I could handle a few awkward comments if it meant launching my career at a prestigious firm. The comments continued. Richard would compliment my exotic look. I'm half Puerto Rican. Ask about my dating life. Stand too close during conversations. Small transgressions, each one deniable, if taken in isolation. "You're overthinking it," my roommate said when I voiced my concerns. "Older guys just talk like that sometimes. They don't mean anything by it." But I knew the difference between generational cluelessness and calculated testing of boundaries. Richard knew exactly what he was doing, incrementally pushing further, to see what I would tolerate. In March, I finally went to HR after Richard accidentally brushed against my breast while reaching past me during a meeting. The HR representative, a woman named Diane, listened sympathetically, took notes, and promised to look into it. 2 days later, she called me back to her office. "I've spoken with Richard," she said, her professional smile firmly in place. "He assures me there was no intentional contact, and he apologizes if you felt uncomfortable. These things can happen in close quarters." "It wasn't close quarters," I insisted. "There was plenty of room. He didn't need to reach across me at all." Diane's smile tightened slightly. "Elena, I understand these situations can be upsetting, especially for someone new to the corporate environment. But it's important to consider whether you might be misinterpreting normal workplace interactions." "Misinterpreting?" I repeated, incredulous. "Richard has an exemplary record with the company," she continued smoothly. "He's been instrumental in Horizon's growth, and he's mentored dozens of young professionals." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Between us, he specifically requested you for his team. He sees potential in you. Don't jeopardize that opportunity over a misunderstanding." I left her office feeling simultaneously gaslighted and threatened. The message was clear. Richard was valuable to the company. I was replaceable. For the next few weeks, I tried to minimize my interactions with Richard, volunteering for projects that would keep me working with other team members, scheduling meetings, when I knew he'd be unavailable. It worked, briefly. Then came the Atlanta trip. Our team was presenting at a major industry conference, and Richard insisted I join the group traveling to Georgia. "Your campaign concept is central to the presentation," he said, though we both knew other team members were more familiar with the material. "This is a great opportunity for you to get exposure." The word exposure made my skin crawl, but I couldn't refuse without raising questions. So I packed my most conservative business attire and prepared to keep my distance as much as possible. For 2 days, I managed. Group meetings, team dinners where I strategically sat between colleagues, prompt returns to my hotel room each evening. But on the third night, Richard cornered me after the conference reception. "We need to discuss your presentation for tomorrow," he said, positioning himself between me and the exit. My suite has a sitting area where we can review the slides. I can just email you my notes, I countered, already reaching for my phone. Elena. His voice took on an edge I recognized as dangerous. Part of succeeding in this industry is being a team player. I'm offering you valuable one-on-one mentoring that most associates would kill for. I glanced around, looking for an exit strategy, but our other colleagues had already departed. A few strangers milled about, none close enough to intervene without me making a scene. Fine, I said finally, but just for 30 minutes. I'm exhausted. In his suite, Richard immediately poured 2 whiskeys, handing me one before I could refuse. Drink, he instructed. You're too tense. This is a career discussion, not an interrogation. Set the glass down untouched. Can we just review the presentation? I'd really like to get some sleep before tomorrow. Always in a rush, he sighed, moving to sit beside me on the couch rather than across in an available chair. That's your problem, Elena. You're so focused on the checklist, the tasks, that you miss the bigger picture. And what's the bigger picture? I asked, shifting away slightly. Relationships, he said, closing the distance I'd created. This industry runs on relationships. The people who advance aren't just the ones who can make a pretty slide deck. They're the ones who know how to connect. His hand landed on my knee. You have potential, Elena. Real potential. But you need someone to champion you, to open doors. I stood abruptly. I appreciate the feedback, but I should go. It's late. Richard's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. Do you think your career will advance if you keep pushing away the people trying to help you? If help means what I think it does, then yes, I'll take my chances, I replied, grabbing my laptop bag. As I reached the door, his parting shot hit like ice water. Ask Melissa Collins what happens to uncooperative team members. She had potential, too. I nearly stumbled. Melissa Collins had been my predecessor, abruptly transferred to another department just before I was hired. According to office gossip, she'd had a performance issue that necessitated the move. Back in my hotel room, I called Jen despite the late hour. Who is Melissa Collins? I asked without preamble. What happened to her? There was a long pause. Where did you hear that name? Richard just used her as a threat because I wouldn't drink with him in his suite. Jesus, Elena. Jen's voice dropped to a whisper. Melissa filed a harassment complaint against Richard last year. Formal, documented, the works. 2 weeks later, she was transferred to a satellite office in Milwaukee. Entry-level position, no advancement track. She quit within a month. My stomach lurched. That can't be legal. Her complaint mysteriously disappeared from the HR system. Richard's friend in IT made sure of that. No complaint, no case. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed. Has this happened before, with other women? Jen's silence was answer enough. Why doesn't anyone say anything? I demanded. This is textbook harassment, maybe even assault depending on what he's done to others. Because people need jobs, Elena, Jen replied tiredly. Because NDAs and settlement agreements exist. Because it's his word against yours. And he's a director, while you're a replaceable associate. After we hung up, I lay awake for hours, anger and fear churning in my stomach. In the morning, I delivered my presentation mechanically, avoided Richard's gaze, and took the first flight back to Boston, rather than the team flight scheduled for later. By the time I returned to the office on Monday, I'd made a decision. I would find another job. Quietly, discreetly, without burning bridges. My student loans didn't care about workplace justice. They just needed to be paid. But fate, as they say, had other plans. The company's annual spring mixer was scheduled for the following Friday. Normally, I would have concocted an excuse to leave early, but Richard had made a point of informing the entire marketing team that attendance was expected, not optional. The threat was implicit but clear. So I arrived wearing the corporate-appropriate equivalent of armor, a black pantsuit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back severely. My strategy was simple: visibility and distance. Stay in crowded areas, never alone, and leave the moment Richard's attention was directed elsewhere. For 2 hours, the strategy worked. I circulated among colleagues, making brief but cordial conversation, always within sight of multiple witnesses. Richard, occupied with board members and executives, barely glanced my way. I was just beginning to think I might escape unscathed when our CEO announced it was time for the annual Department Recognition Awards. Everyone gathered in the main hall, where a small stage had been set up for the presentations. And for Outstanding Marketing Initiative, the CEO announced, the award goes to the Quantum Launch Campaign, led by Richard Keller and implemented by his team. Applause filled the room as Richard took the stage, accepting a small crystal trophy. "I want to acknowledge the incredible work of my entire team," he said, scanning the crowd, "particularly some of our newer members who brought fresh perspective. Elena, where are you? Come up here." My blood ran cold. Everyone was turning, looking for me, smiling encouragingly. There was no way to refuse without causing exactly the kind of scene I'd been hoping to avoid. Wooden-legged, I made my way to the stage, keeping a careful distance from Richard as he draped an arm around my shoulders. Elena spearheaded the social media component that got us over 2 million impressions. Richard told the crowd, his fingers digging into my shoulder. A real rising star. The applause was deafening in my ears as I forced a smile, desperately, counting the seconds until I could step away. But Richard wasn't finished. "In fact," he continued, guiding me toward the side of the stage as the CEO moved on to the next award, "there's someone from the digital team I want you to meet. He might have a project perfect for your skill set." Before I could protest, he had maneuvered me into a secluded alcove just off the main hall. The ambient noise of the party provided cover as he positioned himself between me and the exit, the hotel suite all over again. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his public smile replaced by something colder. "I've been busy," I replied, trying to step around him. "And I should get back to the party." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist. "We need to clear the air first. Your attitude since Atlanta has been noticed." "By whom?" I challenged, pulling my arm free. "People who matter," he replied. "People who determine whether you have a future at Horizon." "Let me guess. That future depends on me being more cooperative?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Don't be crude, Elena. I'm talking about being a team player, about understanding how relationships work in this industry." "I understand perfectly," I said, my fear finally crystallizing into anger. "You use your position to pressure women into situations they don't want to be in. You punish those who refuse. And the company protects you because you bring in accounts." Something dangerous flashed across his face. "Careful. Accusations like that can damage more than just my reputation." "Are you threatening me now?" I asked, raising my voice slightly, hoping someone might hear. "I'm advising you," he corrected, stepping closer. "As your mentor. Your career is at a crossroads. Make the right choice." His hand moved to my hip, then slid to my thigh, fingers spreading possessively across the fabric of my pants. The touch was deliberate, unmistakable, his eyes challenging me to object. "Remove your hand," I said clearly, loudly. "Now." "Don't make a scene," he warned, his fingers tightening. "You're being hysterical over a friendly gesture." "I said stop," I repeated, loud enough that a couple passing nearby glanced our way. Richard immediately dropped his hand, his face transforming into a mask of professional concern. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked for the benefit of our observers. "You look flushed. Perhaps you've had too much to drink." The couple moved on, and Richard's expression hardened again. "That was foolish, very foolish." "I'm leaving," I announced, pushing past him. And on Monday, I'm filing another complaint. With HR. With witnesses this time. His laugh followed me. Go ahead. See how that worked out for Melissa. I was shaking as I collected my purse, fighting tears of rage and humiliation. The complaint would go nowhere. I knew that now. But the alternative was to endure months or years of escalating behavior until either I broke or he tired of the game. As I waited for the elevator, fumbling for my phone to call a rideshare, a voice spoke from behind me. Ms. Alvarez. Elena? I turned to find the female board member, Patricia Winters, if I recalled correctly, watching me with concern. Are you all right? She asked. You seem upset. I'm fine, I replied automatically. Just tired. I was about to head home. Patricia studied me for a moment, then glanced back toward the party. Was Richard bothering you? I noticed you leaving the alcove area rather hurriedly. The directness of the question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? She sighed, reaching into her clutch for a business card. Because you're not the first woman I've seen having that particular expression after an interaction with Richard Keller. I stared at the card in her outstretched hand. Patricia Winters, Board of Directors, with a personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. I can't discuss specific incidents, Patricia continued quietly as I took the card. But if you ever need to talk about anything, call me directly. No intermediaries. The elevator arrived, its doors sliding open with a soft chime. I stepped inside, turning to face Patricia as she held the door. Why are you telling me this? I asked, confusion momentarily overriding my distress. Her expression was unreadable. Let's just say I've been trying to address certain cultural issues at Horizon for some time, but without concrete evidence, it's been challenging. The implication hung in the air between us as she released the elevator door. Take care, Elena, and remember, documentation is crucial. As the doors closed, separating us, her final word echoed in my mind. Documentation. Documentation that Melissa Collins had supposedly provided, only to have it disappear. Documentation that would be my word against Richard's, easily dismissed, or buried. Unless, I pulled out my phone, navigating to the camera app. The video was still recording, just as it had been since Richard had led me to the alcove. The phone strategically positioned in my jacket pocket, with the camera peeking out from between the buttons. High-definition video with crystal clear audio, capturing every word, every touch, every threat. For the first time that evening, I smiled. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, my resolve strengthened by a weekend of careful planning. I had reviewed the video multiple times, confirming that it clearly showed Richard's hand on my thigh, his threatening comments, and my explicit requests for him to stop. I had also done some research into Horizon's corporate structure, particularly the relationship between the board, the executive team, and the HR department. What I discovered was troubling, but unsurprising. Diane, the HR director who had dismissed my previous complaint, was Richard's former colleague from another company. They had worked together for 5 years before both moving to Horizon. The connection explained her willingness to bury complaints against him. It also meant that returning to HR would be pointless at best, dangerous at worst. Instead, I had decided on a different approach. At precisely 9:15 a.m., I knocked on Richard's office door, the video safely backed up to 3 separate cloud locations, and a flash drive tucked in my pocket. Elena, he greeted me, surprise evident in his voice. This is unexpected. We need to talk, I said, closing the door behind me. About Friday night. His expression shifted to wariness. There's nothing to discuss. I think we both said things in the heat of the moment that are best forgotten. That's not how I see it, I replied, taking a seat across from his desk without being invited. In fact, I think what happened is worth documenting thoroughly. A flicker of alarm crossed his face before he regained his composure. If you're here to make threats, You should reconsider. As I mentioned on Friday, accusations without evidence can backfire spectacularly. Fortunately, I said, placing my phone on his desk, screen up, evidence isn't a problem. I pressed play on the video. Richard's face drained of color as he watched himself touching me, heard his own voice making veiled threats, registered my clear objections. You recorded me? He hissed, reaching for the phone. I snatched it back before he could grab it. Don't worry, this is just a copy. The original is securely stored in multiple locations, set to be automatically forwarded to several interested parties if anything happens to me or if I don't enter a specific code every 24 hours. This is illegal, he sputtered. Recording without consent. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, I interrupted. As long as one person in the conversation consents to the recording, it's perfectly legal. I checked. Richard's confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by something between rage and panic. What do you want? Money? The question was so predictable, so aligned with his worldview, that I almost laughed. Of course he assumed this was a shakedown. It was what he would have done in my position. I want to be transferred to another department, I said. Away from you with no reduction in salary or status. I want a formal acknowledgement in my personnel file that the transfer was at my request due to concerns about the work environment. And I want your written assurance that you will have no input into my performance reviews or career advancement going forward. He stared at me, clearly trying to assess whether I was bluffing. And if I agree to these terms, then the video remains private, I said. A personal insurance policy, never to be shared unless you violate our agreement. And if I refuse, I stood, collecting my phone. Then by noon today, this video will be in the hands of every board member, the CEO, and an employment attorney who specializes in sexual harassment cases. The threat hung in the air between us, its weight almost tangible in the silent office, you and I. Won't win, Richard said finally, his voice low. Do you have any idea how many women have tried to take me down over the years? The company will close ranks. They always do. Maybe, I conceded. But unlike those other women, I'm not asking for justice or accountability. I'm just asking to do my job without being harassed. Surely that's a reasonable enough request even for Horizon Technologies. He laughed bitterly. You naive little girl. You think this is about reasonableness? This is about power. And you don't have any. I have this, I said, holding up my phone. And sometimes that's enough. I left his office without waiting for a response, my heart hammering in my chest despite my outward calm. The confrontation had gone more or less as expected. Richard was cornered but still dangerous, like a wounded animal. Now came the waiting game. I had given him until noon to agree to my terms. A gesture of good faith, a chance to resolve the situation without wider exposure. But as the morning crawled by with no word from either Richard or HR, I began to wonder if I had miscalculated. At 11:45, my desk phone rang. Diane from HR, requesting my immediate presence in her office. I found not just Diane waiting, but Richard and the company's general counsel as well. Their expressions told me everything I needed to know. They were preparing for war, not surrender. Elena, Diane began with artificial warmth. Richard has brought a concerning matter to our attention. He says you've made threats based on a manipulated recording. I kept my face neutral despite the surge of anger her words provoked. The recording isn't manipulated. Would you like to view it? That won't be necessary, the attorney interjected smoothly. Ms. Alvarez, you should understand that recording conversations without explicit consent from all parties can expose you to significant liability. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, I repeated, maintaining eye contact. And I was a party to the conversation. The company handbook explicitly prohibits recording in the workplace without prior authorization, Diane countered. By violating that policy, you've given us grounds for immediate termination. So that was their strategy. Discredit the evidence, and fire the whistleblower. Classic. Before you proceed with that decision, I said carefully, you should be aware that the recording has already been shared with my attorney, who specializes in workplace harassment cases. This was a bluff. I hadn't yet consulted a lawyer, but they had no way of knowing that. Richard shifted uncomfortably. The attorney's expression remained impassive. Furthermore, I continued, I've instructed my attorney to forward the recording to the board of directors if I'm terminated today. I believe Patricia Winters in particular would find it illuminating. At the mention of Patricia's name, a flash of genuine alarm crossed Diane's face. Interesting. No one is talking about termination, the attorney said quickly. We're simply trying to resolve a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied. My terms are simple and reasonable. Transfer to another department, documentation, that the transfer was at my request, and assurance that Richard will have no influence over my career path going forward. And in exchange? Diane asked, her earlier confidence noticeably diminished. In exchange, the recording remains private. No lawsuits, no media, no public allegations. Just a clean break and the opportunity to do my job without harassment. The three exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. We'll need to discuss this internally, the attorney finally said. Can you return to your desk while we confer? I stood. Of course, but please be aware that my noon deadline stands. If I don't have written agreement to my terms by then, the video goes to the board. As I walked back to my desk, I checked my watch, 11:52. 8 minutes remaining in this high-stakes game of chicken. At 11:58, my email pinged. A message from Diane, formal and terse. The company agrees to your transfer request, effective immediately. Please report to the product development department tomorrow morning. Further documentation regarding reporting structure will be provided. I had won, or so I thought. What I didn't know then was that Richard had no intention of honoring our agreement, and that his next move would transform my private stand against harassment into something much larger and more public than I ever intended. The transfer to product development initially seemed like the fresh start I'd hoped for. My new manager, Marcus, was professional and focused on results rather than office politics. My colleagues were friendly but respectful of boundaries. For 2 glorious weeks, I came to work without knots in my stomach, without scanning rooms for escape routes. Then came the performance review. I don't understand, I said, staring at the document Marcus had reluctantly slid across his desk. These ratings don't reflect my work at all. The review was scathing. Below expectations in every category, with comments about attitude problems, difficulty working with others, and resistance to feedback. This doesn't match anything you've said to me since I joined the department, I continued, looking up at Marcus's uncomfortable expression. You've been consistently positive about my contributions. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The review was influenced. I was instructed to include specific language. Instructed by whom? Marcus didn't have to answer. We both knew. This violates our agreement, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Richard was supposed to have no input into my performance evaluations. I'm sorry, Elena. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Marcus looked genuinely regretful. If it helps, this review won't impact your current position. It's just documentation. Documentation that would follow me throughout my career at Horizon. Documentation that would justify denying me promotions, raises, or opportunities. Documentation that would make me seem unstable and difficult if I ever complained again. Richard was playing the long game, and he was good at it. I left Marcus's office with the review unsigned, my mind racing. This wasn't just about harassment anymore. It was about systematic destruction of my professional reputation. If I stayed at Horizon, I would be gradually crushed under the weight of manipulated evaluations and backroom discussions. But if I left, Richard won. Again. just as he had with Melissa Collins, and who knew how many others before her. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Patricia Winters. "I need to meet with you," I said when she answered. "It's about Richard Keller." There was a brief pause. "I am available tomorrow morning, 7:00 a.m. at Cafe Nero on State Street. Come alone and bring whatever evidence you have." The following morning, over coffee in a secluded corner of the cafe, I showed Patricia the video. Her expression remained carefully neutral as she watched, but the tightening of her grip on her cup betrayed her reaction. "How many others?" I asked when the video ended. Patricia sighed, suddenly looking older than her 50-something years. "That I know of? 7. Possibly more who never said anything. And the company paid them off? Made them sign NDAs?" She nodded. "Standard procedure. The settlements come from a special fund that doesn't require board approval for individual disbursements. It took me months to even realize it existed." "Why hasn't the board done anything?" I demanded. "Surely this pattern of behavior, without direct evidence, it's one person's word against another's," Patricia interrupted. "The women sign NDAs, the complaints disappear from HR records, and all that remains are whispers and rumors. Nothing concrete enough to justify terminating a top-performing executive. Until now," I said, tapping my phone. "This is direct evidence." "Yes," Patricia agreed. "It is." She studied me carefully. "The question is, what do you want to do with it?" It was the same question Richard had asked, but coming from Patricia, it carried a different weight. This wasn't about extortion or threats. It was about justice. Not just for me, but for Melissa Collins and all the others. "I want to end it," I said simply. "Not just for me. For all of them." Patricia nodded slowly. "There are proper channels for this. I can call an emergency board meeting, present the evidence." "And what happens then?" I interrupted. "The board reviews it in private, reaches some internal decision, maybe removes Richard quietly with a generous severance package. Meanwhile, the system that protected him remains intact. Diane keeps burying complaints. The special settlement fund keeps paying women to disappear. Nothing really changes." Patricia didn't deny it. "What are you suggesting instead?" I took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting we go nuclear. Release the video publicly. Force the company to address not just Richard's behavior, but the entire culture that enabled it." "That's an extreme approach," Patricia cautioned. "Once that video is public, there's no containing the fallout. The company's reputation, stock price, employee morale, all would be significantly impacted." "Maybe they should be," I countered. "Maybe that's the only way things will actually change." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, weighing options and consequences. Finally, she said, "Before we consider that path, let me try the internal channels first. Give me 3 days to convene the board and present the evidence. If they don't take appropriate action, then we can discuss alternative approaches." It was a reasonable request. 3 days, I agreed, but I want to know the outcome, whatever it is. Patricia promised to keep me informed and left for her office, the weight of the video's contents visible in the set of her shoulders. For the next 3 days, I went through the motions at work, hyper-aware of every glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when I approached. Richard was conspicuously absent from the office, attending a conference in Chicago, according to his admin. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Patricia texted me. "Board meeting concluded. Decision reached. Meet me same place, 7 p.m. That evening, back at Cafe Nero, Patricia looked exhausted, but grimly satisfied. The board voted to terminate Richard, effective immediately. No severance, no farewell party, no chance to clear out his office. Security escorted him from the Chicago conference this afternoon. "And the systemic issues?" I pressed. Diane's involvement? The settlement fund? The board has authorized an independent investigation into HR practices, Patricia said. Diane has been placed on administrative leave pending its completion. I should have felt victorious. Richard was gone. The system that protected him was being scrutinized. It was more than I had dared hope for when I first walked into Patricia's office. So why did it feel incomplete? What about the other women? I asked. The ones who were paid off, transferred, pushed out? Patricia's expression clouded. The NDAs are legally binding, Elena. The company can't unilaterally void them, and approaching the women might be seen as interference or witness tampering, if any decide to pursue legal action now that Richard has been terminated. So they remain silenced while he simply disappears? The injustice of it burned in my chest. That's not enough. Patricia leaned forward. I understand your frustration. The board has approved a review of all settlements related to harassment claims over the past 5 years. If patterns of misconduct are identified, more internal investigations, more closed-door meetings. I shook my head. While these women continue believing they were alone, that no one believed them, that what happened to them wasn't serious enough to matter. What are you suggesting? I met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting that everyone deserves to know that their experiences were part of a pattern, that they weren't crazy or overreacting, that the company is finally acknowledging the truth. A public statement, Patricia mused. It's possible, but delicate. We can't name victims or details covered by NDAs. But you can acknowledge that multiple complaints were filed, that they were improperly handled, and that the company is taking steps to address the culture that allowed it. Patricia was silent for a long moment. I'll bring it to the board. But, Elena, she hesitated. There's something you should know. Richard isn't going quietly. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He's threatening to sue for wrongful termination. Claims the video was taken out of context, that you entrapped him. I laughed bitterly. Entrapped him into groping me? That's absurd. It's a delay tactic, Patricia agreed. But he's also spreading rumors about you internally, suggesting you used manipulation and seduction to advance your career, then turned on him when he rejected you. The familiar twist of rage and humiliation rose in my throat. Always the same playbook. Discredit the victim, rewrite the narrative, make her radioactive to potential allies. Let him try, I said, with more confidence than I felt. The video speaks for itself, which is why he's also claiming it's been doctored. I stared at her, incredulous. There are timestamp markers throughout. It's clearly continuous. Logic doesn't matter here, Elena. He's creating doubt, muddying the waters. It's what men like Richard do best. As I walked home that evening, Patricia's warning echoed in my mind. Richard wasn't just fighting for his job. He was fighting for his reputation, his sense of self. Men like him, powerful, entitled, accustomed to taking what they wanted, didn't lose gracefully. I should have anticipated his next move. But even I was shocked by his audacity. The email arrived at 6:42 the next morning, sent to the entire company. Important message from Richard Keller. The truth about my termination. I read it with growing horror as Richard cast himself as the victim of a vindictive employee who had manufactured evidence after he had rejected her inappropriate advances. He claimed I had been placed on a performance improvement plan, a complete lie, and had orchestrated the video as revenge. Most chillingly, he named Melissa Collins and 2 other former employees, claiming they had made similar false allegations after being disciplined for poor performance. By naming them openly, Richard had effectively circumvented their NDAs. He couldn't reveal the details of the settlements, but he could drag their names through the mud, daring them to defend themselves. It was a scorched earth strategy, designed to intimidate and silence. And if the shocked whispers and sidelong glances that greeted me when I arrived at work were any indication, it was working. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Emergency board meeting called. Stay calm. Do not respond publicly. Easier said than done. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus on work while colleagues whispered and speculated around me, my phone rang with an unknown number. Is this Elena Alvarez? A woman's voice asked when I answered. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Melissa Collins. My heart skipped. I believe we have something in common. 10 minutes later, I was in a coffee shop around the corner from the office, face to face with the woman whose name had haunted me for months. Melissa was older than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the carefully controlled demeanor of someone who had learned the hard way not to show vulnerability. Richard's email was forwarded to me by a former colleague, she explained without preamble. He's using the same playbook he used against me, claiming I came on to him, that I was unstable, that I manufactured evidence after being reprimanded. I'm so sorry, I said, meaning it. I never intended for you or anyone else to be dragged into this. Melissa's laugh was hollow. You didn't drag me in, Elena. I've been in this fight for 2 years, just silenced by legal agreements and fear. What happens now? I asked. With the NDA. That's why I wanted to meet, she said, leaning forward. Richard's email just voided my NDA, I blinked, not comprehending. How? By publicly naming me and making false claims about my character and professional conduct, he's violated the non-disparagement clause that was part of our agreement. My lawyer confirms that I'm now free to speak about what happened. The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. So you can tell your story. Not just me, Melissa replied. I've been in contact with 4 other women named in Richard's email. We're all in the same position, NDAs effectively nullified by his desperate attempt to save himself. She slid a business card across the table. Jamie Martinez. She's a reporter with the Boston Globe who specializes in workplace misconduct stories. She's been trying to break the Horizon story for over a year, but couldn't get past the NDAs. Now, she can. I stared at the card, my mind racing. This would go public. Really public. It already is public, Melissa countered. Richard made it public with that email. The only question is whether his lies will be the only version people hear. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Patricia. Where are you? Board needs your statement ASAP. I looked up at Melissa. The board is meeting now. They might still handle this properly. Do you really believe that? She asked quietly. After everything you've seen. I didn't. Not anymore. Not after witnessing how quickly and effectively Richard had seized control of the narrative. How readily people had believed his version despite the video evidence. How easily he had transformed victims into villains. I picked up the card. What exactly are you proposing? A joint interview, Melissa said. All 6 of us on the record with documentation. Jamie can publish by tomorrow morning. 6? I echoed. 5 former employees plus you. All with similar stories, similar evidence. Too many to dismiss as coincidence or conspiracy. It was a turning point, and I knew it. Going to the press meant burning bridges, potential legal consequences, becoming a public figure associated with a scandal, but it also meant truth. Full, unfiltered truth that couldn't be managed or massaged by corporate PR. Let me talk to the board first, I said. Give them one last chance to do the right thing. Melissa nodded, unsurprised. Call me after. Whatever. You decide, I respect it. But know this, Elena. You're not alone. Not anymore. Back at the office, I was immediately ushered into the boardroom where the full board and the company's legal team waited. Patricia gave me a barely perceptible nod of encouragement as I took my seat. Ms. Alvarez, the CEO began, his tone carefully neutral. We've called this meeting to address the situation that has developed. Richard Keller has made serious allegations against both you and the company. They're lies, I said simply. Every word of them. And we all know it because you've seen the video. The video shows an interaction that could be interpreted in multiple ways, the company attorney interjected smoothly. Context matters in these situations. I stared at him incredulously. Are you serious? You can clearly see his hand on my thigh. You can hear me saying stop 3 times. What possible context would make that appropriate? We're not disputing the inappropriate nature of the contact, the CEO clarified quickly. But Richard's claims about your motivations and the events leading up to the incident require investigation. Investigation, I repeated. Like the investigations into Melissa Collins's complaints, and Sarah Porter's, and Jennifer Diaz's, the ones that mysteriously disappeared from HR records? A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. The CEO's eyes narrowed. Those are confidential personnel matters that Richard just made public in his company-wide email, I finished for him, along with defamatory claims about me and these other women, which is why we've directed IT to recall the email and delete it from all company servers, the CEO continued. We're drafting a statement clarifying that Richard's termination was the result of a thorough investigation into policy violations. Policy violations, I echoed. Not sexual harassment? Not a pattern of predatory behavior spanning years? Not a systemic failure of leadership and HR processes? The CEO's face hardened. Ms. Alvarez, we understand you're upset, but inflammatory language won't help resolve this situation. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. Most looked away uncomfortably. Only Patricia held my gaze. I just came from a meeting with Melissa Collins, I said, watching their reactions carefully. She and 4 other women named in Richard's email are prepared to go public with their stories. Tomorrow, in the Boston Globe. The room erupted in chaos. Executives talking over each other, the legal team huddling in urgent consultation, the CEO demanding silence with a raised hand. That would be inadvisable for all concerned, the attorney said when order was restored. These women signed legally binding agreements, which Richard violated this morning with his email, I countered. At least that's what their lawyers are telling them. Another explosion of voices, more urgent this time. What exactly do you want? The CEO asked when he could be heard again. It was the 3rd time I'd been asked that question. By Richard, by Patricia, and now by the CEO. But this time, my answer was different. I want the truth to be acknowledged publicly, I said. Not just Richard's behavior, but the company's role in enabling and covering it up. I want a public statement naming Richard and detailing the pattern of harassment. I want an independent investigation whose findings will be made public. And I want compensation for every woman who was silenced, paid off, or forced out because of his behavior. That's an extensive list of demands, the CEO said carefully. It's not a list of demands, I corrected. It's a choice. Either Horizon, Technologies controls this narrative by coming clean voluntarily, or 6 women with documentation will tell their stories to a reporter who's been investigating this company for over a year. Which would you prefer? The silence that followed was deafening. The board members exchanged glances, unspoken calculations happening behind their eyes. We need to discuss this privately, the CEO finally said. Can you step outside while we confer? I stood. You have 30 minutes. After that, I call Melissa and tell her I'm in for the interview. In the hallway, I paced, checking my watch compulsively. 25 minutes into my ultimatum, Patricia emerged from the boardroom. They're going to agree, she said without preamble. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the least damaging option financially. Does that matter if the result is the same? I asked. Patricia smiled thinly. It matters for the future. True change requires more than crisis management. But it's a start. She handed me a draft statement the board had approved. It acknowledged Richard's pattern of inappropriate behavior toward female employees, the company's failure to properly address complaints, and committed to a thorough overhaul of HR policies and practices. It was corporate speak, carefully, worded to minimize legal exposure while appearing contrite. But it named Richard explicitly and admitted fault, something I never expected to see. "Is this enough?" Patricia asked quietly. Enough to stop the Globe story? I considered it carefully. The statement would validate the experiences of Richard's victims without requiring them to expose themselves publicly. It would put other companies on notice that these behaviors couldn't simply be buried anymore, and it would force Horizon to actually follow through on promised changes, knowing that multiple women stood ready to speak out if they backslid. "I think it might be," I said finally. "But that's not just my decision." I texted Melissa the draft statement. Her response came 5 minutes later. "If they publish this verbatim, with a commitment to the independent investigation and compensation, we'll hold the story for now, but we'll be watching." When I returned to the boardroom and delivered this conditional acceptance, the palpable relief among the executives was almost comical. Within hours, the statement was published on the company website and distributed to major business publications. Richard's response was swift and predictable, a lawsuit against both me and Horizon Technologies, alleging defamation and wrongful termination. But his credibility was shattered. 3 more women who hadn't been part of our group came forward with similar stories. Former colleagues suddenly remembered incidents they had witnessed. The lawsuit was dropped within weeks. 6 months later, I sat across from Patricia in the eye. Same cafe where we had first discussed the video. The company had changed dramatically in that time. The promised independent investigation had resulted in a scathing report and the resignation of the CEO and 2 other executives. Diane from HR had been terminated for her role in burying complaints. A new leadership team had been appointed, with Patricia as the interim CEO. The board approved the settlement packages for all 8 women, Patricia informed me. No NDAs, no confidentiality clauses, just compensation for the careers that were damaged and the trauma they endured. "Including Melissa?" I asked. Patricia nodded. "She's been offered her original position back with 5 years of back pay and a promotion. She's considering it." I smiled, genuinely happy for the woman who had become both ally and friend in the months since Richard's downfall. "And the other changes?" "New HR director starting next week. She specializes in organizational ethics and harassment prevention. Mandatory training for all employees on bystander intervention. Anonymous reporting system that bypasses the management chain. Entirely." Patricia ticked the items off on her fingers. "And my personal favorite, required disclosure of all settlements related to employee conduct in our annual report to shareholders." "That last one will keep future boards honest," I observed. "Nothing motivates executives like having to explain. Hush money to shareholders." "Exactly." Patricia studied me across the table. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" "The offer to head the new employee advocacy office is still open." I had been considering it carefully. The position would report directly to the board, with real power to address workplace issues before they escalated. It was an opportunity to transform Horizon from within, to ensure that what happened to me, to all of us, never happened again. "I'm going to accept," I said, "but with one condition." "Name it." Melissa Collins co-chairs the office with me. I smiled at Patricia's surprised expression. Who better to help rebuild trust than someone who was failed by the old system? "I think that's an excellent suggestion," Patricia said after a moment. "I'll take it to the board today." As we walked out of the cafe into the bright spring sunshine, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. From new hire to whistleblower to change agent, not the career path I had envisioned when I joined Horizon, but perhaps the one I was meant for all along. The video that had started, it all still existed, secure in its cloud storage, but I hadn't watched it in months. I didn't need to. Its purpose had been served, not just in removing one predator from power, but in exposing and dismantling the system that had protected him. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't a grand gesture or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply the truth, captured in high definition, impossible to deny or dismiss. A hand on a thigh. A clear request to stop. Evidence that couldn't be buried or explained away. And the courage to ensure it was seen by those who needed to see it.